It was Halloween night, and the wind outside howled like a distant wolf. The moon hung low, barely visible behind the thick cover of clouds. My mom, just like every year, went all out with decorations. Skeletons, spider webs, and glowing pumpkins littered our front yard. It was her favorite holiday, and every year she tried to outdo the neighbors. But this year was different. Halloween fell on a Sunday, and it was colder than usual. The streets were unusually quiet. Our house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, slightly isolated, with a small patch of woods nearby. My mom had spent the day setting up candy bowls by the door, waiting for trick-or-treaters that never came. By sunset, a few scattered kids had rung the bell, but the lack of foot traffic made her nervous. She kept muttering about the bad energy in the air. Around 8 p.m., she asked me to go up to the attic and bring down the big one, her favorite Halloween prop, an old life-sized witch that cackled and lit up. I hesitated. The attic was the one part of the house I hated. It was cold, cramped, and always smelled faintly of dust, something I couldn't place. But she insisted, so I gave in. I climbed the creaky stairs to the attic door. It was an old pull-down door with a ladder that unfurled slowly, groaning with age. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen and headed up. The attic was even colder than I remembered. Rows of old boxes and forgotten holiday decorations lined the walls. As I walked deeper into the attic, the wooden floorboards creaked under my weight. I found the box with the witch in the far corner, but as I turned to grab it, I heard a faint sound, a whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the attic had no windows, and the whisper sounded close. I froze, straining to hear. It was soft, like someone was speaking just behind me. Slowly, I turned around, sweeping the flashlight across the attic, but I saw nothing, just the usual stacks of boxes and old furniture. I shook it off, grabbed the box with the witch, and quickly made my way back downstairs. I didn't mention the whisper to my mom. She was already disappointed enough about the lack of trick-or-treaters. Instead, I helped her set up the witch by the front door. As the night dragged on, the storm outside grew worse. The wind was now banging against the shutters, and the rain pelted the windows like icy bullets. My mom had gone to bed, still frustrated, and I was alone in the living room flipping through TV channels. Then, I heard it again. That whisper. This time it was louder, clearer, coming from the ceiling. My heart skipped a beat. I paused the TV, holding my breath as I listened. The whispering continued, but now it was followed by something else. Soft, deliberate footsteps above me, in the attic. I jumped up from the couch, staring at the ceiling. The footsteps grew louder, heavier, like someone, or something, was pacing back and forth above me. My mind raced. No one was supposed to be up there. I quietly crept toward the hallway where the attic door hung in the ceiling. The pull-down ladder was still tucked up inside. As I reached for the string to pull it down, I stopped, feeling a wave of dread wash over me. The attic door was moving, just slightly, like someone was pressing against it from the inside. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. Dead silence filled the house. The only sound was my own shallow breathing. I gathered the courage to pull the string, and the ladder came down with a groan. I hesitated before climbing up, my hands trembling as I gripped the flashlight. Slowly, I poked my head into the attic. It was dark, too dark. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows across the room. The whisper returned, but now, it was all around me, coming from every direction. I couldn't make out the words, but it felt like a chant, a low, haunting hum. Then, in the far corner, I saw it. At first, I thought it was just the witch decoration, its black cloak draped over a hunched figure. But the figure moved. It wasn't the witch at all. It was a person. They stood up slowly, their back to me, head tilted unnaturally to one side. They swayed slightly, as if listening to the whispers that filled the attic. My flashlight flickered again, and in that brief moment of darkness, they turned toward me. A face, pale and gaunt, stared back at me. Hollow eyes, too wide for their face, locked onto mine, and a twisted smile spread across their lips. They raised one skeletal hand and beckoned me closer. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the ladder. As I did, I heard the attic door slam shut above me with a deafening thud. I bolted down the hallway to my mom's room, my heart pounding in my chest. I banged on her door until she woke up. When I told her what I saw, she thought I was just playing a Halloween prank. She even laughed. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. For the rest of the night, I stayed locked in my room, trying to drown out the whispers that I could still hear, faintly, coming from the attic. We moved out of that house the next year. My mom always blamed it on the rising property taxes, but I knew the truth. Every Halloween, when the wind howls and the moon hides behind the clouds, I still hear that faint whisper in my dreams. And I wonder if it's waiting for me to come back. It was Halloween, and this year it fell on a Friday. My sister, Lily, and I were looking forward to it all week. Our mom always went a little overboard with the decorations, turning our home into the ultimate spooky destination for trick-or-treaters. It had become a bit of a tradition. Neighbors would rave about how eerie and lifelike our decorations were. We'd always get dozens of kids lining up at the door. We lived in an old two-story house in a quiet neighborhood. The kind of house that creaked and groaned on its own, even when the wind wasn't blowing. The kind of house where the attic always felt a little too cold. This Halloween, it was unusually cold, with the wind howling down the empty streets, blowing away the occasional dry leaf. It felt like a real horror movie, with clouds hanging low, hinting at a storm later in the evening. As Lily and I finished setting up the last of the decorations on the front lawn, we noticed something weird. No kids. The streets, usually filled with the giggling sounds of trick-or-treaters, were quiet. My mom didn't seem too bothered. She figured the cold was keeping the kids inside until later. But I had a weird feeling in my gut, like something wasn't quite right. By 7 p.m., still not a single trick-or-treater. Mom started muttering about how she should have put more decorations up. So she asked Lily and me to go into the attic and bring down one last box of lights we hadn't used yet. I groaned, but Lily insisted we go up together. We pulled down the creaky ladder and climbed up into the attic. The air was musty, and it smelled like old cardboard and dust. The boxes were piled up in messy stacks, just the way they'd been for years. We dug through some boxes until we found the one labeled Halloween Lights. As we were about to head back down, we heard something. A faint, scuffling noise, like fabric dragging across the wooden floor. Lily froze. "Did you hear that?" I laughed nervously. "Yeah, but it's probably just the wind or something." We grabbed the box and carefully climbed down, trying to shake the weird feeling creeping up our spines. Once we were back downstairs, the evening continued normally. Mom finished setting up the lights, and Lily went off to watch scary movies in her room. I was planning on playing some games in mine, but the sound from the attic kept bugging me. It wasn't just the scuffling noise. It was something else, like a faint tapping now and then, like fingers drumming on the floor. At first I ignored it, thinking it was just the house settling or maybe a squirrel that had found its way inside. But the noises grew louder, more insistent, and then I heard it. Footsteps, not loud, but unmistakable. Slow, deliberate footsteps, as if someone was walking right above me, pacing back and forth. I paused my game and sat there, listening. The footsteps stopped, but I swore I could still hear breathing, faint but rhythmic, like someone trying to be quiet. I ran into Lily's room and told her what I'd heard. She thought I was trying to freak her out and rolled her eyes. But when I convinced her to come listen, the attic was dead silent. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. She laughed, called me paranoid, and went back to her movie. But I knew something was wrong. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I was lying in my room, trying to sleep. The wind outside had picked up, and I could hear it rattling against the windows. And then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it again. Footsteps, this time much closer. Almost as if they were right outside my door. I bolted upright, my heart racing. I strained my ears, listening. The footsteps moved down the hall towards the attic ladder. And then, silence. I tiptoed to my door, cracked it open, and peeked into the hallway. The attic door was open. The ladder was down, and I could hear breathing. I quietly shut my door and locked it, my hands trembling. I grabbed my phone and texted Lily. She didn't respond right away, but after a few minutes, she sent me one word: help. I ran to her room, my mind racing with fear. When I opened the door, she was standing by her window, pale as a ghost. She pointed to the ceiling. Someone's in the attic. I nodded, and we both stood there, frozen, listening. We could hear faint creaking from the attic, the sound of someone moving around slowly, as if they were trying to avoid making too much noise. I grabbed her hand, and we ran to my mom's room. My dad was already awake, holding his phone, dialing 911. He had heard it too. The footsteps, the ladder, everything. We huddled together in their room, waiting for the police. It felt like hours, but eventually we heard the sirens outside. The officers came inside, and one by one, they climbed the attic ladder. We heard them moving things around, their footsteps echoing through the house, and then they found him. A man, hunched in the corner behind some boxes, covered in dust and dirt. His eyes were wide and wild, like he hadn't seen daylight in days. He didn't fight, didn't say a word. He just stared at the officers as they pulled him down the ladder. He'd been living in our attic for days, maybe even longer. The police said he must have snuck in through an open window weeks ago and had been hiding up there ever since. He'd been eating our food, taking things from around the house, and we had no idea. As they led him out of the house, he turned and smiled at me. A slow, twisted smile, like he was proud of what he'd done. That night, as we tried to sleep, all I could think about was how long he'd been there, watching us, listening to us. And I still wonder, what would have happened if we hadn't heard him?
It was the last weekend of October, just days before Halloween, and the air was thick with anticipation. My friends and I had been planning our annual Halloween campout for weeks. Every year we'd choose a different location, a cemetery, an old barn, or a forgotten trail. But this year, we decided on something a bit more daring: the abandoned Hollow Creek House. The Hollow Creek House was notorious in our town. It had stood empty for over 50 years, a crumbling relic at the edge of the forest. Stories circulated about why it was abandoned. Whispers of a family that vanished overnight, strange sightings in the windows, and the sound of knocking coming from the walls. Kids dared each other to go near it, but no one ever stayed after dark. This year, we decided to be the first. There were 4 of us: me, Jack, Sarah, and Tom. We loaded our backpacks with flashlights, snacks, and sleeping bags, and set off for the house. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the narrow path that led through the woods. By the time we reached the house, the sky was a dark purple, and the temperature had dropped sharply. The house loomed before us, its windows shattered and its roof sagging. The front door hung off its hinges, and the air around it smelled of mold and decay. Sarah hesitated at the entrance. "Are we really doing this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Of course we are," Jack said, pushing the door open with a loud creak. "We can't chicken out now." The floorboards groaned under our feet as we stepped inside. The interior was just as dilapidated as the outside. Peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and dust that had settled over everything like a blanket. But the air was thick with something else, something heavy and oppressive that made it hard to breathe. We set up our sleeping bags in the main room, an old parlor with a stone fireplace that hadn't seen a flame in decades. Jack pulled out a flashlight and shone it across the walls. "This place is perfect," he said. "We'll be telling ghost stories all night." But as soon as we settled in, the atmosphere shifted. The house seemed to come alive, creaking and settling with every movement we made. The wind outside howled through the broken windows, and the darkness outside pressed in on us from all sides. Even with our flashlights on, shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should have. Around midnight, after hours of telling stories and laughing nervously at every little noise, we all started to feel it. The sense that we were being watched. Tom was the first to mention it. Does anyone else feel like we're not alone here? We all fell silent. Jack tried to laugh it off, but the unease was contagious. I felt it too. The house was too quiet, and the darkness seemed to be pressing closer. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her sleeping bag, her eyes darting toward the empty doorway that led to the kitchen. Maybe it's just an animal, I said, my voice shaking more than I intended. And then we heard it. A soft, steady knocking sound, coming from the walls. At first, we thought it was the wind, but the rhythm was too deliberate. It started at one end of the room and slowly moved toward us, as if someone or something was walking through the walls, trying to find its way in. Jack's face went pale. What the hell is that? We grabbed our flashlights and pointed them at the walls, but there was nothing. The knocking grew louder, closer. Sarah clutched her knees to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. We need to leave, she whispered. But before anyone could move, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, a voice, raspy, barely more than a whisper, drifted from the hallway. Get out! We froze. The voice was low, male, and filled with malice. It echoed through the empty house, sending chills down my spine. Tom jumped to his feet, grabbing his backpack. We're leaving. Now! But before we could even get to the door, something slammed against it from the other side, hard enough to rattle the frame. We all screamed, stumbling backward as the door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Jack, the bravest of us all, shone his flashlight into the hallway, but it flickered and died almost immediately. In the dim glow of my own flashlight, I could see his face drained of color, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. We need to get out of here, I muttered, edging toward the door. But as I moved, something cold brushed against my arm. Something invisible, but unmistakably there. Sarah let out a choked scream, clutching her throat. It's in the room with us, she gasped, backing against the wall. Panic set in. We bolted for the door, shoving it open and tumbling into the night. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees, but the house was silent behind us, as if whatever had been inside was watching us go. We sprinted down the path, branches slapping against our faces, our breath coming in ragged gasps. But just as we reached the edge of the woods, we heard it again. The steady, deliberate knocking. We didn't stop running until we were back at my house, safe behind locked doors. We tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed us. It's just your imagination, they said. Old houses make strange noises. But we knew the truth. A few days later, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, still haunted by the events of that night. As I wiped the condensation from the glass, I saw something behind me. A shadow. Faint but unmistakable. I spun around, but the room was empty. The knocking began again that night. No matter where I went, it followed. Soft, deliberate taps, as if someone, or something, was always just a few steps behind me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, and every time I thought I was safe, the sound would return, louder and closer than before. I still don't know what we unleashed in that house, but I know one thing for certain. It hasn't stopped following me. And I wonder, when will it finally catch up?